I'm Pat Tully of the Ketchikan Public Library, and this is Reading Aloud. This evening I'm reading an essay by John Neal. Neal was born in Portland, Maine in 1793, and after a difficult and poverty-stricken childhood, he became a writer, an essayist, a critic, and one of the first champions of American literature as distinct from European literature. Tonight I'm going to read his pretty sobering essay, Children, What Are They Good For? This was first published in 1830. The child is the father of the man. Men are but children of a larger growth. How often do we meet with this array of words? Yet how insensible we are to the profound philosophy they enwrap. Sublime and astonishing truths, uttered every day in our hearing, set before our eyes at every step in our journey through life, written over all the monuments of earth, upon the pages and banners of all history, upon the temples and the pyramids, the palaces and the sepulchres of departed nations, upon all the doings of the past and the present, as with unextinguishable fire, and sounding forever and ever in the unapproachable solitudes of the future. Yet heard with indifference, read without emotion, and repeated from mouth to mouth, day after day and year after year, without a suspicion of their deep meaning, of their transcendent importance, of their imperishable beauty. And why? The language is too familiar, the apparent signification too simple and natural for the excited understandings of the multitude. There is no curtain to be lifted, no veil to be rent as with the hands of giants, no zone to be loosened, no mystery to be expounded afar off, as in the language of another world, nothing to be guessed at, or deciphered, nothing but what anybody might understand, if he would, and therefore nothing to be remembered or cared for. But in simple truth, a more sublime interrogation could not be propounded than that which may appear to be answered by the language referred to. What are children? Step to the window with me. The street is full of them. Yonder a school is let loose, and here, just within reach of our observation, are 2 and 3 noisy little fellows, and there another party mustering for play. Some are whispering together and plotting so loudly and so earnestly as to attract everybody's attention, while others are holding themselves aloof, with their satchels gaping so as to betray a part of their plans for tomorrow afternoon, or laying their heads together in pairs for a trip to the islands. Look at them. Weigh the question I have put to you, and then answer it, as it deserves to be answered. What are children? To which you reply at once, without any sort of hesitation perhaps, just as the twig is bent, the tree is inclined, or men are but children of a larger growth, or, peradventure, the child is the father of the man. And then perhaps you leave me, perfectly satisfied with yourself, and with your answer, having plucked out the heart of the mystery, and uttered, without knowing it, a string of glorious truths, pearls of great price. But, instead of answering you as another might, instead of saying, very true, what if I were to call you back to the window with words like these? Do you know what you've said? Do you know the meaning of the language that you've employed? Or, in other words, do you know your own meaning? What would you think of me? That I was playing the philosopher, perhaps? That I wanted to puzzle you with a childish question? That I thought I was thinking, or at best I was a little out of my senses? Yet, if you were a man of understanding, I should have paid you a high compliment. A searcher after truth, I should have done you a great favor. A statesman, a lawyer, a lawgiver, a philanthropist, a patriot, or a father who deserved to be a father, I should have laid you under everlasting obligations. I should have opened a boundless treasury underneath your feet. I should have translated you instantly to a new world, carried you up into a high mountain, as it were, and set before you all the kingdoms of the earth, with all their revolutions and changes, all future history, the march of armies, the growth of conquerors, the waxing and waning of empire, the changes of opinion, the apparition of thrones dashing against thrones, the overthrow of systems, and the revolution of ages. Among the children who are now playing together, like birds among the blossoms of the earth, haunting all the green shadowy places thereof, and rejoicing in the bright air, happy and beautiful creatures, and as changeable as happy, with eyes brimful of joy, and with hearts playing upon their little faces like sunshine upon a clear water. Among those who are now idling together on that slope, or hunting butterflies together on the edge of that wood, a wilderness of roses, you would see not only the gifted and the powerful, the wise and the eloquent, the ambitious and the renowned, the long-lived and the long-to-be-lamented of another age, but the wicked and the treacherous, the liar and the thief, the abandoned profligate and the faithless husband, the gambler and the drunkard, the robber, the burglar, the ravisher, the murderer, and the betrayer of his country. The child is the father of the man. Among them, and that other little troop just appearing, children with yet happier faces and pleasanter eyes, the blossoms of the future, the mothers of nations, you would see the founders of states and the destroyers of their country, the steadfast and the weak, the judge and the criminal, the murderer and the executioner, the exalted and the lowly, the unfaithful wife and the broken-hearted husband, the proud betrayer and his pale victim, the living and breathing portents and prodigies, and the embodied virtues and vices of another age and of another world, and all playing together. Men are but children of a larger growth. Pursuing the search, she would go forth among the little creatures, as among the types of another and a loftier language, a mystery whereof has just been revealed to you, a language to become universal hereafter, types in which the autobiography of the future was written ages and ages ago. Among the innocent and helpless creatures that are called children, you would see warriors with their garments rolled in blood, the specters of kings and princes, poets with golden harps and illuminated eyes, historians and painters, architects and sculptors, mechanics and merchants, preachers and lawyers. Here a gravedigger flying his kite with his future customers. There a physician playing at marbles with his. Here a predestined to an early or violent death for cowardice, fighting the battles of a whole neighborhood. There a Cromwell or a Caesar, a Napoleon or a Washington, hiding themselves for fear, enduring reproach or insult with patience. A Benjamin Franklin higgling for nuts or gingerbread, or the old Parr of another generation sitting apart in the sunshine and shivering at every breath of wind that reaches him. Yet we are told that just as the twig is bent, the tree's inclined. Hereafter is made up of the shreds and patches of heretofore. If men are but children of a larger growth, then what are children? Men of a smaller growth. And this happens to be truth, not only in the world of the imagination, but in the world of realities, not only among poets, but among lawyers. At law, children are men, little children murderers. A boy of 9 and others of 10 and 11 have been put to death in England, 2 for murder, a 3rd for cunningly and maliciously firing 2 barns. Of the little murderers, 1 killed his playmate, and the other his bedfellow. 1 hid the body, and the other himself. And therefore, said the judges, they knew they had done wrong. They could distinguish between good and evil, and therefore they ordered both to be strangled. And they were strangled accordingly. As if a child who is old enough to know that he has done wrong is therefore old enough to know that he deserves death. So with regard to children of the other sex. At law, babies are women, women babies. The same law which classes our mothers and our wives our sisters and our daughters, with infants, lunatics, idiots, and persons beyond sea, allows a child to be betrothed at 7, to be endowed of her future husband's estate at 9, and to agree or disagree to a previous marriage at 12. And what is law in England is law here. We are still governed by the Court of King's Bench, the lawyers and the judges of Westminster Hall. Let no man say, therefore, that these are the dreams of poetry, the glittering shapes that wander about forever and ever among the vast chambers of a disordered imagination. They are not so. They are no phantasms. They are realities. They are substantial existences. They are known to the law. Such are children. Corrupted, they are fountains of bitterness for ages. Would you plant for the skies? Plant in the live soul of the warm and generous and youthful. Pour all your treasures into the hearts of children. Would you look into the future as with the spirit of prophecy, and read as with a telescope the history and character of our country and of other countries? You have but to watch the eyes of children at play. What children are, neighborhoods are. What neighborhoods are, communities are. States, empires, worlds. They are the elements of hereafter made visible. Even fathers and mothers look upon children with a strange misapprehension of their dignity. Even with the poets, they are only the flowers and blossoms, the dewdrops or the playthings of earth. Yet of such is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven, with all its principalities and powers, its hierarchies, dominations, thrones. The Savior understood them better. To him their true dignity was revealed. Flowers, they are the flowers of the invisible world, indestructible, self-perpetuating flowers, with each a multitude of angels and evil spirits underneath its leaves, toiling and wrestling for dominion over it. Blossoms, they are the blossoms of another world, whose fruitage is angels and archangels. Or dewdrops? They are dewdrops that have their source not in the chambers of the earth, nor among the vapors of the sky, which the next breath of wind or the next flash of sunshine may dry up forever, but among the everlasting fountains and inexhaustible reservoirs of mercy and love. Playthings. God, if the little creatures would but appear to us in their true shape for a moment, we should fall upon our faces before them, or grow pale with consternation, or fling them off with horror and loathing. What would be our feelings to see a fair child start up before us a maniac or a murderer, armed to the teeth? To find a nest of serpents on our pillow, a destroyer or a traitor, a Harry VIII, or a Benedict Arnold asleep in our bosom? A Catherine or a Peter, a Bacon, a Galileo or a Bentham, a Napoleon or a Voltaire, clambering up our knees after sugar plums? Cuvier, laboring to distinguish a horsefly from a bluebottle, or dissecting a spider with a rusty nail? Laplace trying to multiply his own apples, or to subtract his playfellow's gingerbread? What should we say to find ourselves romping with Messalina, Swedenborg, and Madame de Stael, or playing Bo Peep with Murat, Robespierre, and Charlotte Corday, or Puss in the corner with George Washington, Jonathan Wild, Shakespeare, Sappho, Jeremy Taylor, Mrs. Clark, Alfieri, and Harriet Wilson? Yet stranger things have happened. These were all children but the other day, and clambered about the knees, and rummaged in the pockets, and nestled in the laps of people no better than we are. But if they had appeared in their true shape for a single moment, while playing together, what a scampering there would have been among the grown folks! How their fingers would have tingled! Now to me there is no study half so delightful as that of these little creatures, with hearts fresh from the gardens of the sky, in their first and fairest and most unintentional disclosures, while they are indeed a mystery, a fragrant, luminous, and beautiful mystery. And I have an idea that if we only had a name for their study, it might be found as attractive and as popular, and perhaps, though I would not go too far, perhaps as advantageous in the long run to the future fathers and mothers of mankind as the study of shrubs and flowers, or that of birds and fishes. And why not? They are the cryptogamia of another world, the infusoria of the skies. Then why not pursue the study for yourself? The subjects are always before you. No books are needed, no costly drawings, no lectures, neither transparencies nor illustrations. Your specimens are all about you. They come and go at your bidding. They are not to be hunted for along the edge of a precipice or on the borders of a wilderness, in the desert or by the seashore. They abound not in the uninhabited or unvisited place, but in your very dwelling houses, about the steps of your doors, in every street of every village, in every green field, in every crowded thoroughfare. They flourish bravely in snowstorms, in the dust of the trampled highway, where drums are beating and colors flying, in the roar of cities. They love the sounding sea breeze in the open air, and may always be found about the wharves, and rejoicing before the windows of toy shops. They love the blaze of fireworks and the smell of gunpowder, and where that is, they are, to a dead certainty. You have but to go abroad for half an hour in pleasant weather, or to throw open your doors or windows on a Saturday afternoon, if you live anywhere in the neighborhood of a schoolhouse, or a vacant lot, with here and there a patch of green, or a dry place in it, and steal behind the curtains, or draw the blinds, and let the fresh wind blow through and through the chambers of your heart for a few minutes, winnowing the dust and scattering the cobwebs that have gathered there while you were asleep. And lo, you will find it ringing with the voices of children at play, and all alive with the glimmering phantasmagoria of leapfrog, prison base, and knock up and catch. Let us try the experiment. There, I have opened the windows, I have drawn the blinds, and hark! Already there is the sound of little voices, afar off, like sweet bells jangling. Nearer and nearer come they, and now we catch a glimpse of bright faces peeping round the corner. And there, by that empty enclosure, you see a general mustering and swarming, as of bees about a newly discovered flower garden. But the voices we now hear proceed from two little fellows who have withdrawn from the rest. One carries a large basket, and his eyes are directed to my window. He doesn't half like the blinds being drawn. The other follows him with a tattered book under his arm, rapping the posts, one after the other, as he goes along. He is clearly on bad terms with himself. And now we can see their faces. Both are grave, and one rather pale, and trying to look ferocious. And hark, now we are able to distinguish their words. "Well, I ain't scared of you," says the foremost and the larger boy. "Nor I ain't scared of you," retorts the other, "but you needn't say you meant to lick me." And so I thought, another, less acquainted with children, might not be able to see the connection, but I could. It was worthy of Aristotle himself, or John Locke. "I didn't say I meant to lick ye," rejoined the first. "I said I could lick ye, and so I can." To which the other replies, glancing first at my window and then all up and down the street, "I should like to see you try." Whereupon the larger boys begins to move away, half backwards, half sideways, muttering just loud enough to be heard, "Aw, you want to fight now, just 'cause you're close by your own house." And here the dialogue finished, and the babies moved on, shaking their little heads at each other, and muttering all the way up the street. Men are but children of a larger growth. Children but empires in miniature. How beautiful and how strange are the first combinations of thought in a wayward or peevish child. And then how like we all are in our waywardness and peevishness. It is but a change of name, and one trifle is about as good as another to breed a quarrel, or to throw the wisest and best of our grown babies off their balance. A bit of writing, the loss of a paper with pictures on it, a handful of glittering dust, or somebody making mouths at us, a word or a look, and we are stomping with rage, or miserable for half a day. A cloud coming up when the horses are at the door, a little bad weather, a spot upon our new clothes, or a lump of sugar not quite so large as another's. And what children we are! How perfectly wretched! I once knew a little boy who, after sitting a while as if lost in thought, turned to his mother and said, "Mother, what did you marry my father for? Why didn't you wait till I grew up and then marry me?" Rather a strange question, to be sure, and the little fellow was but just old enough to put his words together. But compare it with many a question put by the sages of the earth. Consider it side by side with the ponderings and the misgivings, the inquisitiveness and the apprehensions of a great philosopher, when he interrogates the builder of the universe and sets himself in array face to face with Jehovah. Nay, I've heard a very intelligent person of mature age betray a confusion of thought altogether as laughable as that of the poor boy. She had been to see a captious old lady whom her father, in his youth, had once intended to marry. "And how did you like her?" said I. "Not at all," she replied. "Oh, you don't know how glad I am that father did not marry her. I should never have liked her, I'm sure." As if, marry whom he might, she must have been born, she herself, with precisely the same preferences, prejudices, and opinions. "Oh, mother," said little Mary, aged 2 years and a half at the time, looking up as she heard a noise and blushing from head to foot, "I hear a bad smell. 'Tain't me nor brother. It was an old man in the next house," hemming loudly and suddenly with a cough. Modesty is one thing, squeamishness about children another, and this is really too good to be lost. I remember a little boy who was a lexicographer from his birth, a language master and a philosopher. From the hour he was able to ask for a piece of bread and butter, he never hesitated for a word, not he. If one wouldn't serve, another would, with a little twisting and turning. He assured me one day, when I was holding him by the hand rather tighter than he wished, he was but just able to speak at the time, that I should choke his hand. At another he came to me all out of breath to announce that a man was below shaving the wall. Upon due inquiry, it turned out that he was only whitewashing. But how should he know the difference between whitewash and lather? A big brush and a little one. Show me, if you can, a prettier example of synthesis and generalization, or a more beautiful adaptation of old words to new purposes. I have heard another complain of a schoolfellow for winking at him with his lip, and he took the affront very much to heart, I assure you, and would not be pacified until the matter was cleared up. Another, now at my elbow, hardly 5, has just been prattling about the handle of a pin, meaning its head. To him shavings were board ravelings about a 12-month ago, and I shall never forget his earnestness about what he called the necklace of the gate, a heavy iron chain with a large weight swinging to it, which a wood sawyer had forgotten to replace after finishing his work. It is but yesterday that a little boy, being asked by an elder sister in my presence what a widow was, he had been talking about a widow, replied, "A poor woman that goes out a-washing." What better definition would you have? At home or abroad, is not the poor widow always a-washing? Now the floors of a wealthier neighbor, and the clothes of somebody who happens not to be a widow, and now with her own tears the face of her little baby, that lies half asleep and half sobbing in her lap. Other children talk about bones in peaches. Osteologists are they, and others, when they have the toothache, aver that it burns them. Of such is the empire of poetry. I have heard another give a public challenge in these words to every child that came near, as she sat upon the doorstep, with a pile of tamarind stones, nutshells, and pebbles lying before her. "Ah, I've got manier than you." That child was a better grammarian than Lindsay Murray, and her wealth, in what was it unlike the hoarded and useless wealth of millions? Not long ago, while passing through a narrow, unfrequented street, my attention was attracted by 2 little girls at play together. one a perfect tomboy, with large laughing eyes and a prodigious quantity of hair, the other a little timid creature, altogether too shy to look up as I passed. The romp was balancing her body over the gate, and the little prude was looking at her. On the opposite side of the way were two smart-looking boys, whom I did not observe until I heard a sweet, clear voice at my elbow, saying, almost singing indeed, "I'll give you a kiss if you want one." I stopped and heard the offer repeated by the shy-looking puss, while the romp stared at her with her mouth wide open, and the boys cleared out with a laugh, being too shamefaced to profit by the offer. Verily, verily, men are but children of a larger growth, and women too. There was the language of truth, of innocence, of unadulterated nature. There are no mealy-mouthed human creatures among the pure. But lo, that child is going forth into the world, leaving behind her the green and beautiful places, haunted with wild flowers, where everything appeared in the language of truth. And after a little time, with far less purity, she may blush and tremble at every thought of being kissed, with or without her leave. And the poor boys, anon they are to be the pursuers, and pray and beseech where, but for a newly acquired and counterfeit nature, they might loiter along the wayside, and be sure of a call from the rosy lips and bright eyes that hovered about their path. Poor boys. But children are wonderful for their courage, their patience, and their fortitude. I have known a little boy completely worn out by watching and suffering, tear off the bandages at last, and looking up into the face of a woman who watched over him, say to her with a sweet smile, "Georgie must die, Chamber." Her name was Chambers. "Georgie must die. Georgie wants to die." And he did die, with that very smile upon his mouth. Not many years ago, another was caught in a mill. They stopped the machinery and took the wheel to pieces, but it was an hour and a half before they could free her entirely. During this time she threw her arms around her father's neck, and kissing him whispered, "Am I dead, Papa?" She died within 2 hours after she was liberated. One might almost expect to see winglets of purple and gold budding before death from between the shoulders of such a child. The reasoning of the little creatures, too, is always delightful, and if you are good-natured enough to follow them through their own little demonstrations, without insisting upon the language of a syllogism, always conclusive. Take 2 or 3 examples in proof. A child of about 3 years of age, unperceived by its mother, followed her down cellar, and when its mother returned, was left there. By and by the little thing was missed. Inquiries were made in every quarter. The whole neighborhood was alarmed. The well searched, the henhouse, the barn, the very pigsty, but all in vain. At last somebody had occasion to go into the cellar, and there, upon the bottom step of the stairs, the little creature was found, sitting by herself, as still as death, and purple with cold. Half frantic with joy, the mother snatched her up, and running to the fire with her, asked her why she did not cry. "I couldn't, Ma," was the reply. "I couldn't, Ma. It was too dark." After all, now, was that not a capital reason? Was that not the truth? How many there are who cannot or will not cry, even to their Father above, because it is so dark. Another child of about the same age used to lie awake and chatter by the hour after she went to bed. Out of all patience with her, one night her bedfellow said to her, "Will you hold your tongue, Lucinda, and let me go to sleep?" "No, I can't." "You can't? Why not, pray?" "Because it makes my stomach ache, Aunt Rachel." And even that child, why do you laugh at her? Didn't she tell the truth? And was that not a capital reason? How many grown people are there who cannot hold their tongues, and, if truth were told, because it makes their stomach ache, or for some other reason not half so much to the purpose? There are decided politicians, too. A friend of mine has a boy just able to speak. "Hooray for Jackson," he said one day before his father. "Why, Charles, Why do you hurrah for Jackson? I am not a Jackson man. Don't care if you ain't. I are, said the reply. A leader, of course, for the next generation, of those who are to think for themselves. Their childish cunning, too, is exquisite. I remember seeing a little boy about 4 years of age bite his eldest sister's finger in play so as to leave a mark, for which he was chidden by his mother, whereupon he stole away to his sister and put his finger into her mouth and told her to bite. She refused, he insisted, and after a good deal of persuasion, she yielded. Harder, harder, whispered he. At last a mark appeared, a little dent. You understand French, I hope. Now, said he, pulling her toward his mother, now, his large eyes sparkling with triumph, and holding up his plump, rosy little finger, and making all sorts of faces. Now, come to mother yourself. Was there ever a better illustration of the Thistlewood plot, of the gunpowder plot, or of that policy which, here as well as there, makes offenses profitable to the informer? The boy was but another Vidocq, or another first consul of the French Empire. And have you never, when riding by in a stagecoach, seen a little fellow at the window or at the door of a house in the country, crying as if his very heart would break? Did he not always stop till you got by? And then didn't he always begin again, with the same look, the same voice, the same outcry, refusing to be comforted? These are the fellows for offices. He only wanted an augmentation of his salary, that was all, and I dare say he got it. Ah, hurrah, hurrah, here's a fellow's birthday, cried a boy in my hearing once. A number had got together to play ball, but one of them having found a birthday, and not only the birthday, but the very boy it belonged to, they all gathered about him as if they had never witnessed a conjunction of the sort before. The very fellows for a committee of inquiry into the affairs of a national bank, too, if you please. Never shall I forget another incident which occurred in my presence between two other boys. One was trying to jump over a wheelbarrow. Another was going by. He stopped, and after considering a moment, spoke. I'll tell you what you can't do, said he. Well, what is it? You can't jump down your own throat. Well, you can't. Can't I, though? The simplicity of, well, you can't, and the roguishness of, can't I, though, tickled me prodigiously. They reminded me of sparring I had seen elsewhere. I should not like to say where, having a great respect for the temples of justice and the halls of legislation. I say 'tis white oak. I say it's red oak. Well, I say it's white oak. I tell ye 'tain't white oak. Here they joined the issue for the first time. I say 'tis. I say 'tain't. I bet you $10,000 of it. Well, I'll bet you $10,000. Such were the very words of a conversation I have just heard between two children, the elder about 6, the other about 5. Were these not miniature men, stockbrokers and theologians, or only land speculators? Well, my lad, you've been to meeting, hey? Yes, sir. And who preached for you? Mr. P. Ah, and what did he say? Can't remember, sir. He put me out so. Put you out? Yes, sir. He kept looking at my new clothes all meeting time. That child must have been a close observer. Will anybody tell me that he did not know what people go to meeting for? It was but yesterday that I passed a little girl with large hazel eyes, sitting by herself in a gateway, with her feet sticking straight out into the street. She was holding a book in one hand, and with a bit of stick in the other, was pointing to the letters. What's that? Said she in a sweet chirping voice. Hey, look on. What's that, I say? F? No, shaking her little head with the air of a schoolmistress who has made up her mind not to be trifled with. It reminded me of another little girl, somewhat older, who used to sit and play underneath my windows, and look down into the long green grass at her feet, and shake her head, and laugh and talk by the hour, as if she had a baby there, to the infinite amusement of all the neighborhood. That girl should have betaken herself to the stage. She was the very spirit of what may be called the familiar drama. Talk as we may about children, their notions are sometimes both affecting and sublime, and their adventures more extraordinary than were the strangest of Captain Cook's, more perilous than that of him who discovered America. I have known a child, not 3 years of age, and hardly tall enough to reach the round of a ladder, clamber up the side and along the roof, and seat himself on the ridgepole of a 2-story house before they discovered him. Very odd things occur to all parents, if they would but observe them and treasure them in the flowering of their children's hearts. When I am dead, Sister Mary, I'll come back to see you, and you must save all the crumbs and feed me. Won't you, Sister Mary? Said a little boy to his sister. Upon full inquiry, I found that he had associated the idea of little angels that would fly about with the pigeons belonging to a neighbor, which he had been accustomed to toll from the perch into the backyard, with little crumbs of bread saved at the table. On another occasion he laid down his knife and fork, and looking up with the most perfect seriousness and apparent good faith, said, "Father, I mustn't eat any more fat meat." "Why not, my boy?" "God told me I must not." "God? When?" "Last night, Father." Of course the child had been dreaming, so I urged the inquiry a little further. "Did you see God?" "Yes, Father." "And how did he look?" "Oh, he looked like thoughtfully and casting about for a comparison, and then all at once he brightened up and said, "Like a woodchuck, Father." For a moment I was thunderstruck. Where could he have got such an idea? He had never seen a woodchuck in his life. Instead of laughing at the absurdity of the notion, however, I treated the matter very seriously, and after a while found he had been on the watch at the window every day for nearly a month, to see a woodchuck which had escaped from a neighbor, and had burrowed under our woodhouse, and used to come out after nightfall to feed. The little fellow was perfectly honest. He had no idea of untruth or irreverence. Others had seen the woodchuck, and he had not, and nothing occurred to him half so strange or mysterious for a comparison. It would not do to compare God with anything he had seen, and a woodchuck was the only thing he had not seen, which corresponded at all with his notions of the invisible. But children have other characters. At times they are creatures to be afraid of. Every case I give is a fact within my own observation. There are children, and I have had to do with them, whose very eyes were terrible. Children who, after years of watchful and anxious discipline, were as indomitable as the young of the wild beast dropped in the wilderness, crafty and treacherous and cruel. And others I have known who, if they live, must have dominion over the multitude, being evidently of them that, from the foundations of the world, have always thundering at the gates of power. There sits a little girl with raisins in her lap. She had enough to spare a few minutes ago, but now she has given them all away, handful by handful, to a much older and more crafty child. She has not another left, and as she sits by him and looks him up in the face, and asks him for one now and again so innocently, he keeps cramming them into his mouth, and occasionally doles one out to her with such a look, so strangely made up of reluctance and self-gratification. And she, poor thing, whenever she gets one, affects to enjoy it prodigiously, shaking her head and making a noise with her mouth as if it were crammed full, just as the twig is bent, etc., etc. And it is but the other day, only a week ago, I had an opportunity of seeing a similar case. A girl of 18 months was overhauling her play basket before a boy of 7. She was ready enough to show all her toys, but whatever he took into his hand, she would instantly reach after. Before 2 minutes were over, I found him playing the man of business, pretending to like what he did not, and to dislike what he most coveted. There were heaps of playthings strewed about all over the floor. Among them were the remains of a little dog which had been sadly pulled to pieces, but which the boy took a decided fancy to, nevertheless. He kept his eye upon them, and after taking possession, leaned over the little girl, and shook his head, and spoke in that peculiarly soothing voice, and with that coaxing manner which are common to horse-dealers, and which children so well know how to counterfeit when they have a worthy object in view. "Oh, the pretty teapot! Oh, my! Mary want it," said he, turning it over and over, and carefully displaying the crooked nose, the warped handle, and the useless bottom, while he secured the dog. That over, he tried his hand at a little Indian basket, talking all the time as fast as his tongue could run in favor of the toys he had no relish for. A diplomatist in embryo, a chess player, a merchant, a lawyer. What more can the best of them do? What more have they ever done? I saw 3 children still throwing sticks at a cow. She grew tired of her share in the game at last, and, holding down her head and shaking it, demanded a new deal. They cut and run. After getting to a place of comparative security, they stopped, and holding by the top of a board fence, over which they had clambered, began to reconnoiter. Meanwhile, another troop of children hove in sight, and arming themselves with brickbats, began to approach the same cow, whereupon 2 of the others called out from the fence, "You, Joe, you better mind, that's our cow." The plea was admitted without a demurrer, and the cow was left to be tormented by the legal owners. Hadn't these boys the law on their side? A youth once lived with me who owned a little dog. One day I caught the dog worrying what I supposed to be a rat, and the boy standing over him and encouraging him. It proved to be a toad. The poor creature escaped during my interference. Before a month had gone over, the dog showed symptoms of hydrophobia, and I shot him. Not long after this, I found the boy at a pump, trying to keep a tub full, which appeared to have no bottom. I inquired what he was doing, and it turned out that he was trying to drown a frog. I asked the reason. Because the toad had poisoned the poor little dog. Here was the process of ratiocination worthy of any autocrat that ever breathed. Because A suffered soon after worrying B, therefore C shall be pumped to death. Precisely the case of Poland. I know another little boy who once lost a favorite dog. About a week afterward, the dog reappeared, and the boy was the happiest creature alive. But something happened a little out of the way, which caused further inquiry, when it turned out that the new dog was not the old one, though astonishingly like. The only difference I could perceive was a white spot under the neck. Well, what does our boy do? Receive the stranger with thankfulness, and adopt him with joy for his extraordinary resemblance to a lost favorite? No, indeed, but gives him a terrible thumping, and turns him neck and heels out of doors on a cold, rainy night, as if the poor dog had been guilty of personating another. How perfectly of a piece with the behavior of grown people who have cheated themselves and found it out. Woe to the innocent and the helpless who lie in their path, or sleep in their bosom, or inhabit among their household gods. But children are not merely unjust and cruel and treacherous, even as men are. Like men, they are murderers, mischief-makers, devils at times. I knew 2 boys, the older not more than 4, who caught a hen and took its eyes out, and they let her go, after which, on seeing her stagger and tumble about, perhaps afraid of discovery, they determined to cut off her head. One was to hold her and the other to perform the operation, but for a long while they could not agree upon their respective shares in the performance. At last they hit upon a precious expedient. They laid her upon the steps, put a board over her body, upon which one of the 2 sat, while the other sawed off her head with a dull case knife. Parents, fathers, mothers, what child of 4 years of age was ever capable of such an act without a long course of preparation? For neglect is preparation. Both were murderers, and their parents were their teachers. If the child is the father of the man, what is to become of such children? If it be true that just as the twig is bent, the tree is inclined, how much have you to answer for? If men are but children of a larger growth, watch your children forever, by day and by night. Pray for them forever, by night and by day, and not as children, but as men of a smaller growth, as men with most of the evil passions and with all of the evil propensities that go to make man terrible to his fellow men, his countenance hateful, his approach a fiery pestilence, and his early death a blessing, even to his father and mother. The end. Thank you for joining me this evening, and have a good week.